Hi, I'm Dr. Jodi Wheeler-Toppen. Thank you for joining me in this look at integrating reading, writing, and science. When I was teaching high school biology, it became clear to me that a lot of my students were being held back by reading. They would say they had read whatever I assigned. I'd even watch them do it, but they didn't seem to retain much. Our science test scores were going up, but then they plateaued, and we couldn't seem to move them. I realized that our science scores had reached a point slightly higher than our school's reading scores. And I realized that we weren't going to get any better science scores as long as our students were being tested on material they had to read. We could teach all the science we wanted, but if they couldn't read and understand the questions, the test wouldn't show it. And it wasn't just about wanting high test scores. For some of my students, it felt like there was an underlying issue. It was almost as if they struggled to make sense of science data in the same way that they struggled to make sense of text. They weren't thinking about science or reading the way I wanted them to think. I finally headed back to school to the University of Georgia to learn as much as I could about helping students with reading and writing, while at the same time doing good science teaching. I've spent the last 15 years working at the intersection of reading, writing, and science, and I'm excited to share with you some of what I've learned. Let's imagine a lesson. The teacher brings in a bucket of worms, and each kid gets one. They spend a few minutes observing their worm and writing down their observations. Then they are told to make a specific observation, to hold out their finger and try to move it exactly as their worm moves. The students quickly realize their finger can't do exactly what the worm is doing. They can't stretch and then fatten their finger to move it along. How can this be? And how can they find out the answers to other questions that came up as they observed the worms? The teacher pulls out a picture book, Wiggling Worms at Work by Wendy Pfeffer. Before she reads, she and the students list the questions they are hoping the book will help them answer. Then she explains a specific reading comprehension strategy that they're going to use, making a mental movie about what they're reading. When a science book has pictures, they can be very helpful, but sometimes good readers need to imagine what is happening as they read. When the teacher reaches the page that describes how worms crawl, she says, "Remember how we talked about making a movie in your head? This page is going to be about movement, and anytime things are moving, it's a good idea to crank up your pretend movie maker. We have a picture here, but as I read, I want you to try to see a worm moving the way it is described here." She projects the text and reads, "Worms can wiggle, twist, turn, and even tie themselves in knots because they have no backbones. Their soft bodies are made up of rings or segments. These segments act like the coils on a slinky toy and let a worm bend." After finishing the page, she asks the students to describe what their imaginary movies looked like. After she finishes the book, the students pull out their writing notebooks and write a letter to a friend that explains how their worm moved and why the worm could stretch and shrink when their own finger could not. The students are hooked the moment they hold a wiggling worm. By the time the teacher turns to the book, the students are eager to read and primed to learn a new reading skill. When it comes to time to write, they are confident in their knowledge and ready to share what they've figured out. Elementary students are naturally curious and want to learn about how the world around them works. Science becomes the engine for the reading and writing train. The example works with worms, but the same structure can work for any science topic. You start with hands-on science, move to reading, and then writing. It works within a 5E framework for inquiry science, based on those middle 3 E's, the explore, the explain, and the extend, using reading for the explain and writing for the extend. It matches the 3-step system that reading teachers use to work with text. Considerable support before reading, some support during reading, and a little after reading. And think about it. Reading comprehension skills such as questioning text or relating to prior knowledge make a lot more sense if you really do want to find out the information that the text is telling you. This structure is also completely consistent with the next generation science standards and the Common Core, which prioritize figuring out and communicating science over just learning about it. But let's take a minute to look at an alternative style of content area reading comprehension, one that shows up a lot in science classrooms. So here's a reading passage. I'll read it aloud for us, and then we'll answer the questions. Ferdy and Niddle gabbled on the plag wort. Pling, Ferdy twaddled, pling, oppy plee, Niddle peedled, and vang roo sot. So, first question, where did Ferdy and Niddle gabble? You probably said on the plag wort. Correct. What did Ferdy twaddle? Pling, pling, appy plee. You probably got that one correct as well. What did Niddle do after he peedled? And you have it correct if you said vang roo sot. Now, let's move on to the last question. It's the critical thinking question. You can see because it has a star next to it. Where else might Ferdy and Niddle gabble? Well, you may or may not have had a good answer for this one. The answer is froggin'. But it's okay if you didn't get that one. It is, after all, the critical thinking question. But congratulations! You still got 75%. You passed! When we ask students to read the chapter and answer the questions at the end, this is the type of thinking that we get. And students aren't stupid. They know what they're doing. Try asking a kid how they go about doing an assignment like that. I've had numerous students tell me something along the lines of, oh, well, I look in the question for the word I don't know, and then I scan the chapter to find that word in dark print and copy whatever sentence has it. We can do better than that. We want our students to have the literacy skills to draw from their prior experiences, texts, conversations, labs, lecture, media and video, to evaluate those sources and assemble it all into an understanding of the topic that they can use to solve problems in the world. The videos in the rest of this series will help you understand why your students struggle with literacy and specific strategies that can help them read and write about science. Look for the other videos including knowing enough to read, reading strategies for science, sentence frames for reading, writing, and forming science knowledge, integrating writing and science, before and after writing, making science claims and supporting them with evidence.